afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry we're running a little bit late, 5 minutes late. Welcome to the 6th annual Vancouver Turkish Film Festival. This is our third panel, and the title of the panel is Women Who Work in the Film Industry in the US, Canada, and Turkey. I would like to very quickly introduce the panelists, a very esteemed panel of women here. First of all, let's just give them a big applause before I just would like to start by saying that we acknowledge that we are on unceded indigenous land belonging to the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Stolo, Tsleil-Waututh nations. I would like to start by introducing our moderator, Justine Barda. Please wave at the audience. Justine Barda is the founder and CEO of Telescope Film. She's also a senior programmer with the Seattle International Film Festival. She has previously consulted to Sundance and the Dubai International Film Festival. She's a cinephile and a Turkophile. And she currently teaches in the Film Studies program at Seattle University. Next to her is Shirin Aysan. Shirin Aysan is a Turkish-American journalist, director, and she's a content creator based in Seattle. She has recently directed episodes for the CNN's critically acclaimed series, This Life with Lisa Ling, and a 3-part series of MSNBC called The Story of Cool. She's the recipient of many prestigious awards, especially for her work on child rights for PBS. She's the director of the Seattle Turkish Film Festival and the co-founder of Yomama, which is a platform that advocates a social revolution to remove the stigma around being a mother in the workplace. And Carolyn, you'll know Carolyn from previous years. Carolyn is based here in Vancouver. She's the executive director of Women in Film and Television in Vancouver. It's a member-driven and non-profit organization. And in her role, she organizes the Vancouver International Women in Film and Festival, and I strongly encourage you to come and participate in that festival. She recently made an amazing film called, I always say Ciao Bella, but it's Bella Ciao, right? It's called Bella Ciao, and it's premiered in Whistler. Thank you for being here, Carolyn. Okay, Binnur Karaevli, there she is. She's the executive producer and creator of The Protector, the first Turkish Netflix international original series. And she also worked for, you would know BKM. And she is, we're showing one of her films on Sunday. She directed The Eye of Istanbul, the documentary about Araguler. I highly encourage you to come on Sunday to come and see it. And last and definitely not the least, Saadet Aksoy, beautiful inside and out. Saadet is acknowledged as an actress both nationally and internationally. One of her first performances called Egg, that took her to the Cannes Film Festival, and she's been to Sarajevo Film Festival and Valdijava International. I should slow down. I'm going to slow down, sorry. It's a time factor. So Saadet worked in many American productions with Catherine Zeta-Jones, Penelope Cruz, and she was in a film called Twice Born with directed by Sergio Castellito, did I say it correctly? And that premiered in the Toronto Film Festival as well. And we know her from The Magnificent Century and countless TV series where one of them was a bestseller, not a bestseller, mostly viewed, sorry. And Saf, the film that you're going to see right after this panel, Saf, it premiered in the Toronto International International Film Festival. There will be a Q&A with Saadet Aksol right after the panel, and Justine Barda is kind enough to facilitate that Q&A, so don't go anywhere. And she won a Best Actress Award at Ankara Film Festival. I should just mention quickly that she's working on an amazing project. The director is Kaan Müjdeci, and the name of the film is Iguana Tokyo. So it's coming out in 2020. So I would like to leave the podium to you, Justine. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, and thank you for being here. And first of all, a big thanks to Nural and Ellen for putting together this panel and for inviting all of us to participate. It's a really kind of amazing group. And I know that for myself, it's the first event I've ever been involved with where we were talking about these issues in a multinational context. So thank you very much for that. So it's now 2 years since the publication of the first Weinstein stories. It was October 2 years ago. And the rise of the Me Too movement in Hollywood. So I thought that we could start by having us talk about what, if anything, has changed in that time in our respective countries. For example, in the US, there has been significant momentum around the issues of gender discrimination, sexual harassment, and sexual assault in the entertainment world and beyond. This has included the rise and spread of the Me Too movement on social media, the surfacing of thousands of allegations of sexual misconduct, the launching of hundreds of investigations, some resulting in criminal charges that are now slowly wending their way through the courts, and dozens of high-profile men being fired or stepping down from their positions, in some cases to be replaced by women. It feels like some of that may be slowing down now, but there is definitely a different kind of awareness and a more widespread awareness that we're going to talk about, I think, at greater length over the course of the panel. But I'd also like to hear from my fellow panelists about what the last 2 years has been like in Turkey and in Canada.
I live and work in the US, so that's what I can talk about. And I think the most important thing in the big picture is the message and the information has changed. Sexual harassment is not okay and will not be tolerated, and no matter how powerful you are, you will get fired, hopefully. In the recent New York Times article, it was over 200 men lost their jobs over public allegations of sexual harassment. I think that has changed, and there will be more people losing their jobs, and I think that's the most important message overall here. So hopefully from now on we will not be harassed, or the people who got harassed will have the courage to talk. I think that's the most important thing in the US that I think about.
I work both in the US and in Istanbul, and what I see that has changed, but this has been a process, I think, of like 20 years, is that there's much more women, especially with the new streamers. The streaming services really helped for women to tell their stories, more women showrunners and directors. So things that you couldn't pitch to a network 5 years ago, there's possibility of doing interesting, diverse stories now. So that has changed, and a lot of the networks in the US have implemented programs where they are hiring more women who are directors and showrunners. So that, I think the Me Too movement expedited that. That was already in the process. As far as Turkey is concerned, I don't think that it has changed. I know Saadet will talk about it, we had something similar to that in Turkey, even before Me Too. But my feeling is that there we still need a long way to go as far as hiring more female directors, showrunners, writers, and female producers. I mean, female decision makers when it comes to the final say. So.
I think together with all the tangible changes that we talk about, to me, one of the biggest change was the change of perspective of the people in the film industry. Like Shirin said, it became obvious that the position of men in power, if they are doing these, harassments or like anything wrong, and it's shakeable. It's changeable. The ground under their feet is not solid. So I think that was a really good message. That's been a really good message, and it's still continuing. So I kind of feel this air in Los Angeles that men are more afraid now, which is changing a lot of things as a chain reaction. And this is one of the most important things to me, because like as an actor, before the Me Too movement became this big, it was still all these old-fashioned conservative perspectives towards women, towards actresses. Even when you go to a meeting, there were certain expectations from you. I'm not saying that these harassments or anything, but like you have to look in a certain way, you have to behave in a certain way. So all these things are changing right now, and I'm seeing these things like in front of my eyes. And when I look at Turkey, like Binur said, of course in Turkey we appreciate the Me Too movement as people from the industry. And a lot of my friends from the industry, we talk about it and we're like, look what's happening in the US, and it's really inspiring. But I can't talk about any like definite changes that's happening in Turkey in the industry. In 2015, maybe we'll talk about it in detail later on, we had a similar movement, but just the outburst of the movement was coming from a different place. A girl called Özgecan Aslan was murdered, brutally murdered and raped. And after that, there was a hashtag on Twitter, Sen de Anlat, tell your story. So a lot of people, a lot of women started talking about their own stories of harassment, fear, and what they've been facing in daily life and professional life. So that was kind of interesting. And when Me Too started happening here, then you tend to think that, wow, like different women from different parts of the world, they're awakening and they're doing these movements not knowing each other, because like there's no way that people here knew about Turkey and it affected it. So, but I don't know, we'll talk about the movement later on, yeah.
So when we talk about the Me Too movement, I think it's important to see it as a reaction to a symptom of a larger problem, and that is the lack of gender inequality, the lack of gender equality in the film and television industry. And I think there are three manifestations, well probably many more, but three that I can think of, manifestations of the lack of gender equality, and one is job equity, equal opportunities for women in the industry. The second is working conditions, and that's really what the Me Too movement was about, the sexual harassment on set, etc. And the third is the cultural impacts of the lack of gender equality. So if we're going to look at the impact of the Me Too movement, I think we have to look at all those three areas. And certainly in terms of working conditions, there have been efforts to improve that. The unions have come on board, some government agencies have come on board to create codes of conduct,
reporting procedures. There's more training now, respectful workplace training, things like that have happened as a direct result of the Me Too movement. And that's positive. I don't know if it's going to have lasting effect unless we address the lack of equality. And in terms of that, the Me Too movement has brought awareness to the issue. And that awareness has helped the public and the agencies, the government institutions. They have encouraged them to support initiatives that were already in place before the Me Too movement. And may I talk about some of those initiatives now?
Sure, yeah.
So, for example, Women in Film and Television Vancouver, in a sense, is our advocacy committee. I take no responsibility for this, under the leadership of Sharon McGowan. The 50-50 by 2020, people know about that? So it's 50-50, meaning 50-50 equality, men and women, by the year 2020. So Sharon was pestering Claude Jolicoeur, who's the head of the National Film Board of Canada, and he undertook an analysis of gender balance at the NFB, and at our festival in 2016 announced that the NFB would reach gender parity in terms of the hiring of women directors and in terms of financing, which is very important, by 2020. And that was really significant, him making that announcement in 2016. So since then, and partly as a result of the growing awareness caused by the Me Too movement, the other agencies in Canada have come on board. So Telephone Canada and the CMF have also made commitments to 50-50 by 2020. So that's been very exciting for us, and the job of Women in Film is to keep monitoring that. So every year at our festival, we kind of do a report card. Where are we at? And then another significant change was in 2017, under the leadership of our advocacy chairs, Susan Britton and Sharon McGowan. They put forth a submission to the CRTC. So that's the regulatory body in Canada that regulates the broadcasters. And as you know, well, in Canada, there is a lot of public financing. Oddly enough, the public financing is triggered by the private broadcasters. So if the broadcasters aren't on board with gender parity, all of the 50-50 by 2020 isn't going to make a big difference. So they put a submission to their CRTC and brought the lack of equality to the Commission, and the Commission has since required that the broadcasters come up with measures to address it, to monitor in their own organizations and to come up with measures to address it. And they have just made those announcements in early October. Each broadcaster has had to say what they're going to do, and we're just now kind of analyzing that and seeing, we'll come up with a conclusion soon and announce what we think of their measures. So those have been very positive results, not directly of the Me Too movement, but certainly the Me Too movement helped bring awareness and support that.
Absolutely. I'd actually like to spend a little more time talking about the results of just this greater awareness, this more widespread awareness, both on the part of people who are inclined to or have committed sexual assault, sexual harassment, but also on the part of people who experience it. And I've broadened this to include gender discrimination as well. But one of the things that's been interesting to me in the past couple of years is the way that this has become a widespread public conversation. And you can assume, I find in the industry when talking to colleagues, that this is something that we all recognize is going on, that we agree that it's a problem. And this is a relatively new thing, but you can take that awareness, you can take those assumptions for granted. It feels like it's moved the conversation to a new level. So I'm wondering if you have shared that experience. Like, what does awareness look like on the ground, in the real world?
Sitting next to you.
In the real world, in the day-to-day business of my life, I think it changed the conversation in the way that when I walk into a meeting with 8 men and 2 women, now I have the power even make the joke. Do you think there's something wrong here? You have 2 people, 2 women and 8 men. You can make them uncomfortable and you can make them think about it. Okay, for example, in recent weeks, I was in one of those meetings and we were talking about which stories we should bring to life. And there are 2 women and 8 men. And yes, they're great as they are, but they're not going to tell my story, or my point of view is as important as theirs and different. So day to day, now I think people have the awareness and I can talk about it and I can bring this up in the work environment I am. And now people can think, okay, I think this is not right, so we should bring more female directors, get more female producers and more female stories. So that's
And
my
this is
take.
different than it might have been before?
Yes, it is, because maybe 3-4 years ago, I would have seen this, I would have walked into this meeting, but I wouldn't have the courage, or I wouldn't think that I would be supported by the other men saying, yes, you're right, we should have more women here. I think that's what's changed for me.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to address this from a creative point of view that maybe 5 years ago in the US, there wasn't that much interest, for example, in the stories from the Middle East or in the stories from different countries, and also in the stories with female leads. So what I have seen, and I'm very, very happy about that, is now there is really interest in female-driven shows. Like I'm working on a couple of new projects right now, and one of them is based on a series of books, and the main character is a man. But since I'm writing and I'm creating it, I just thought, well, I want to change this into a woman. And that is getting much more of a positive reception. So that's really good. And also the idea that people are much more willing to accept a female showrunner, creator. That is a change that has happened, I think, in the last couple of years. And here in the US, I see, and I guess Canada, but in the US and in the UK, I see more stories that have very strong and complicated female characters, especially with the TV series and the streamers, because I think, as I said earlier, there are many more opportunities for interesting female characters on TV right now. And in Turkey, this is still lagging, especially the portrayal of female characters and female stories and female-driven. Even though most of the TV audience happens to be Turkish women, there is this sense that women characters fall into 2 different categories. There are either these harlot vixens, terrible, conniving women, or they are very, virginal, goody two shoes. So I mean, there is that difference that I see in my life.
Yeah, like Binur said, I also see a lot of female-driven stories, which is, so as a female actor, I see more options and outstanding options in the US, because even maybe like 7 or 10 years ago, it was more accepted, and I was, as an actor, more accepting the fact that my character will always be told through the perspective of a male character, but now it's definitely changing, which is really exciting. And actually, when I first saw Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the Swedish production of the movie, I was really excited, and I actually couldn't wait for this wave to become bigger and for it to come to the Turkish industry, and it was one of the good examples. And now I see a lot of examples like this, and in Turkey, I feel more empowered to sit down with a director or a producer if I see any problems with the female character. Sit down and talk about it, because I don't think they're doing it out of like bad intentions. They're writing these characters like one-sided out of bad intentions. It's just people need to be educated. Even I have been educated with what's been happening in the world with the Me Too movement, with all these female movements. When I look at myself, my professional life, my professional perspective, that was 7 years ago, 10 years ago, 13 years ago, how I was grasping the work environment, how I was like considering working with, like working on set as a female actor. Now I see it's changed dramatically. And I think all these like talks that we're having, it's also very educational, and it's been educational for me, because 10 years ago I didn't feel powerful enough to say these things to people. But now I know that I'm not alone, and it's not only me that's thinking something's going wrong. So now I see that we can talk about it. So it's if I see a problem with a female character on script, and I think if I think it needs to be changed, I just talk about it. And most of the times, people are open to it. And also there's, in quotations, there's the trend of female-oriented characters, which is amazing. So that's why people are more open to it. Maybe not in Turkish TV series, because now, we're going to talk about that too. Like with the Turkish TV series, the depiction of women, we think it's very problematic. But still in films, and especially like independent films, directors and writers are more open to it.
I like your point about that there are things that you might have accepted yourself a few years ago, and that is changing, or your sense that like, that you go into a room, there's only 2 women and 8 men, and that you feel like you can say something about it. I feel like, first of all, it's also a matter of just like recognizing that there's something wrong with that. Like a few years ago, I might have gone into that room and thought like, that's just how it is, that's normal. So there's a sense that, first of all, that something is wrong, and also that it can change, that it's possible, the change is possible. I thought we might move into talking about, I think where you were heading with reference to Turkish film and series. I mean, in our conversations, we seem to keep coming back to 2 central issues. Carolyn, you sort of addressed this. Both the conditions for women working in the film industry and the depiction of women on screen, and obviously these are deeply interrelated. So let's talk about that. I mean, maybe we can even start by talking about some of the films in the festival. Or recent depictions of women in Turkish films and series from the past few years. Okay.
Well, for example, I can just talk from personal experience. For me, creating The Protector, which was the first Turkish Netflix, but also the first Turkish superhero series, which was very challenging actually to do a completely new genre in Turkey. It was very important for me to make sure that the female characters were strong and independent women. And actually there were 2 female wasn't that complex as it was written, and the actress actually sat down with me. I remember for like 2 days, and she was asking me questions about her character, and I was like, yes, you're right. So we developed the script a lot more because she was also pushing for her character, which I did appreciate, being a female writer myself. So I think, but the thing is, we were doing it for Netflix. Our audience was the young Turkish audience, so we were freer to create women that were more real and complicated and strong. But I do feel like in Turkish TV, I mean Turkish TV for the Canadians who don't know, it happens to be the second most exported content in the world after US content.
Has a powerful
Second
impact.
most exported. I mean, even for our show, we have fans from all over, from Peru to Uruguay to Argentina. I mean, it's very interesting. Turkish TV series work very well in all the patriarchal societies in the world.
They're very popular.
Why? Which happens to be, Latin America, Middle East, Eastern Europe. Because a lot of the Turkish TV series, and especially the ones that have been extremely successful, including the Magnificent Century, which Saadet was in, they deal with the problems of women, female characters who are oppressed in a patriarchal society and how they deal with that. Even though they're all melodramatic love stories, the undercurrent is about women. However, I feel like in the last 6 years or so, a lot of these series have become less, the female characters have become less complex, and most of the female characters have become poor girls who are trying to find a rich guy by all means necessary. So I think that this might be a cultural shift. So that is alarming to me because, as Saadet had said earlier, when young girls are watching this, and I mean, independent films are great, but of course TV has so much more power since it goes to everybody's living rooms. When a 15-year-old girl is watching this, all she sees is not, women who are trying to get an education, to get a job, but by all means necessary, get that rich guy. So that to me is something that really needs to be changed.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
What was I saying? So, running the Vancouver International Women Film Festival, I look at submissions this year, for example, 917 submissions of films created by women. So most of those films that I watch have women in strong roles, complex characters. There are a lot of wonderful films made by women about women, but before Turkey, there's Hollywood, and that's 80% of the content consumed by the world is created by Hollywood, and I guess the next one is Turkey. And so it's the distribution of these stories which seems to be a real problem. I mean, we know there's been a lot of research that shows, role models in the entertainment industry. What we see in film and TV, we act out in life. So we need those stories to get out there. And it's not that the stories aren't being made, it's just that they're not being seen.
Yeah, if I go back to the Turkish TV series again, there was a research done by TÜSİAD, the Turkish Industry and Business Association, 2 years ago, and they actually did this research according to 12 TV series in Turkey. And so I have like a couple of results
Great.
coming from this research. So the women in the Turkish TV series, in those Turkish TV series, they mostly have the parenting responsibility. Like 79% of women in the series, they have the parenting responsibility. It's only 21% of men who have that responsibility. And their professional life is very limited. We don't really know about their jobs or what they're doing apart from their family life or their house life. So 80% of the women, we see them in scenes that are outside of professional life. And 1 out of 3 women are housewomen, so they only do house chores in the scenes that they have. 92% of women, they are doing house chores, and 92% of the scenes that they have, and 82% of the scenes where we see men, they're doing business-related things. So it's, I think it's very limiting, like you said, if you are a 13 or 14-year-old girl watching these TV series, and if the example that you're seeing in front of your eyes in your daily life is not really different from these TV series, then you actually, you think, like we talked like a couple of minutes ago, we say that we've been educated by this movement, but by what we've been seeing on media. So if you're seeing this on media, so that's definitely what you're going to think for the rest of your life, that what you deserve, what you are going to be facing in your daily life. So, earlier while we were chatting with Vinod, something we talked about, even like 6-7 years ago, I think it was different. We saw more female characters who were actually the real writers of their destinies, who can change their destinies. But we don't really see them anymore in Turkish TV series. Like if we talk about like specifically TV.
To that end, one could argue that the remarks by government officials in Turkey about men and women not being equal and how the women should be treated, maybe it might have a little effect on all these TV. A tiny bit effect on that. That might have happened because I think at some point, 5-6 years ago, we were going in the right direction and then something happened and we got pulled back again. And not all we see, but the things that we see on TV, the violence and domestic violence being normalized on TV, then a girl who's watching it, then okay, that's what happens over there, that's what happens in my family, that I don't have to, or I don't have the support to fight it, so
Right,
they're not modeling a good behavior.
definitely. I think that storytelling has such immense power, especially visual storytelling, which is film and TV, really can offer incredible role models to people. And when you don't see that, then it's really terrible. As Sada said, I think that about 10 years ago, or even more than that, there was a huge campaign, like an ad campaign in Turkey against honor killings. So that was, there was a lot of movement towards empowering women, but now a lot of the even domestic violence seems to be normalized because some of the TV series have this, and women watching it, they deal with it in their daily lives, and they're like, okay, I guess this is how it is, and since it's a fact of life, and it's, I think, partially cultural as well. So how to change this? the way to change it is, and funny enough, we were talking earlier about this, we have a lot of writers who are women in Turkey for TV. And some directors who are female as well, but the ultimate decision makers that are the producers and the very top network people are all men. And there is this idea that the audience wants to see this type of traditional roles for women. So I think all the female writers are also boxed into that. So one way to change it is really to have more female final decision makers. And then that comes to finances, and that's another whole, issue, I think. For women, it makes it difficult because our business in big films and big TV shows are incredible financial enterprises. I mean, a lot of money is at stake, and for reasons we have discussed, it's very hard for men or for society to entrust that to a female leader.
Okay. I wanted to just to turn from series to films for a little bit to talk about another trend that I've noticed as a programmer of film from Turkey in particular, which is that there are more and more men telling stories about women, and we see some of them in this festival. Staff in part, right? Passed by Censor. Three Sisters from last night. There are a number of them. One just won 2 prizes at the Antalya Film Festival. Sometimes I was telling you about a love story between 2 women, love spells and all that. So this is a trend that I have noticed. And as well as male directors telling stories that sort of interrogate or critique masculinity. Like Noah Tree, like Brothers, which I really recommend if you haven't seen it, playing this festival. But back to men telling stories about women, in some ways it seems like a great trend, like a lot of these stories are told from a progressive point of view, and yet it's still men telling stories, right? It's no substitute. So I'm wondering, where are the women directors, women writers of film, of independent film in Turkey? Why, like I know so many women producers, but I don't know so many women directors. Why is that? Where do we start?
Where are they?
In the States.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, even if we have more female directors in TV in Turkey, there are much, much less in films. I think it's, I don't think there are any initiatives for female directors in Turkey. I've never heard about it. No governmental initiatives for female directors, and yeah, like you said, I think because it's I'm gonna give an example from my personal life. A very close friend of mine who is a female director, she's actually working on her first feature film right now, and she has been working, she worked before for one of the big production companies in Turkey, and she had been working there for quite a long while. One of the problems that she was facing, actually the people that she started working together there with, the men, they kind of got more jobs than she did, like commercial jobs or like other jobs. And I think it's like because we don't, yeah, say.
Well, I just want to say that there is this culture in Turkey, which there is a similar another one in the US too. First of all, our business is a subjective artistic business. So people usually want to work with people that they are aligned with artistically or they're friends with, you know. So then it becomes, there's a bit of a club element, which happens in the US, but in Turkey, when I was younger, I mean, as a female director, writer, I was really scared of this abi, you know, abi means big brother, you know, like the abi club, because, you know, there's an older director or producer and a younger male director comes and says, oh, hey, big brother, you know, but as a woman, it's very hard for you to say abi, you know. And I felt quite intimidated by that, you know, whatever, 15 years ago. But I mean, now, of course, I have to care less because I'm older. But I do think that that affects people. It's hard to break into that brother club, you know,
And
or the
also,
men's club.
Like, even if today's independent film industry in Turkey is totally independent from the old Yeşilçam tradition, it still has some hints of it in it. And Yeşilçam is a very patriarchal way of making films. I mean, extremely patriarchal. So when you look at Yeşilçam and when you look at independent film industry in Turkey, if you compare these two, you would say, oh, we've come a long way. Like, I mean, even like with that, there's a huge difference.
Right.
But like you said, it's still the independent film industry is very much like male-oriented. On set, there are a couple of directors that are trying to change this, even male directors, and they're trying to tell women's stories as much as they can. But it's just, I think, it's independent efforts. There's no support system for that.
Like individual efforts.
Individual efforts, yeah.
I mean, there's no government-sanctioned programs for, and what you've said about female producers, it's interesting because there are a lot of female producers, not in the sense that they put the money, but they go out and find the money, independent film I'm talking about. They apply to grants, find the money to serve the artistic vision of a male director. So this happens quite a lot in Turkey. It's interesting, but I do think that it's very important to tell stories from the female perspective as well. I mean, I believe that women can write great male parts and men can write great female parts. So I'm not talking about that, but I think because there is such a divide, that we definitely need more female storytellers.
And I think it's, I think it's also, for the independent films, if we talk about specifically about them, Turkish Ministry of Culture is a huge support for those films. And it's like the first step that you have to take. And then you can go to the other, like foreign funds and all the other ways. So, it's really hard for certain stories to get the support from the Turkish Ministry of Culture, like especially for the last couple of years. And I'm sure for women, it's like triple more difficult. Yeah.
That kind of reminds me of the, I was thinking about this earlier, the last scene in the movie last night, A Tale of Three Sisters. This is not a spoiler. Where the grandfather has his daughters gathered around him. He's like, do you want to hear my story? Do you want to hear my story? Do you want to hear my story? And they're just like, no. There needs to be more of that. Okay, and speaking of what there needs to be more of, maybe we can sort of move in the direction of talking about what we would like to see happen, what we think what needs to happen.
Festival was one of the festivals who pledged to that, and they're going for a 50-50
Which
like.
one?
No,
Oh,
in Turkey.
Oh.
One of the film festivals, along with Cannes and many other festivals. So it is a great thing, but on the other hand, I also don't want this to be, look, we made the pledge and we were looking for movies made by women and we couldn't find any, so what are we gonna
Come
do?
to me, I'll give them to
So that is, we were talking about earlier, which is a pipeline problem, right? So if the women directors haven't been given the opportunities for many years, and there are all these other initiatives to boost male directors, then of course there's a unequal amount of men and women making movies. So for that, what I would like to be happen is more opportunities, and women need to advance in their careers, but the way to do that is to get more jobs. If I'm not chosen because I'm a female, then how am I going to get this experience to be bidding for a much bigger budget movie? So that's what I would like to see, more initiatives, more programs in North America as well as Turkey. And the problems that we're talking about, we have the same in North America as well. It's not all roses. Yes, there are, of course, initiatives more in here than Turkey. And also we have a government's different points of view. But that's what I would like to happen. I would like to see more festivals really looking for female directors as you are doing and as Nural and Eylem did for this festival. And in this festival, as far as I know, Sibel was the only movie co-directed by a woman. And yours, of course. Two.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I personally think that we need to definitely have, more female directors, writers, but I do think that as women, we have to look at ourselves and see what we are doing individually. We have to help each other, and I think for thousands of years we have been sort of taught to compete with one another, especially in the patriarchal societies. I mean, Turkey, for example, had hundreds of years of the harem tradition, where mostly women competed with each other to be the mother of the sultan. So I think we come from that background, and we have to find different ways to help each other. I mean, I personally have hired a lot of women to work with me. I've respected the actresses that I work with and really sought out their opinion on their characters. So I just think that all of us need to talk the talk, walk the walk, and really help each other, because men definitely do hire each other and help each other. So it's also a little bit up to us too in the field to change things.
I don't have anything to add.
I did want to go back to the point that you were talking about earlier when we were just beginning about the parallel movement in Turkey in 2015, the Tell Your Story hashtag, and how you think it differed from the Me Too movement. I mean, in some ways they're parallels, but you were also saying that it has it has worked out differently.
Me Too movement started talking about the industry specifically, about the film industry and what was wrong with the film industry, and also people started talking about specific names, and that was really important, and it actually paved the way for other women to tell their own stories with specific other people. So the difference was what happened in 2015 in Turkey. It became a movement for a while in Turkey because of a very tragic event that happened to a regular girl on a bus, and people were outraged with what happened. And a lot of the celebrities, a lot of the people from the media, journalists and well-known people, writers, they started talking about their own stories on Twitter. They told what was happening to them before, like when they were growing up or in their professional life. So, but it was usually general stories with no names. And to me, that's one of the distinctive points. And it's really hard like we all talked earlier, in the US, the Me Too movement, it was a process, it took a lot of time, and people knew about it for a while, even it became this big. And it's totally understandable. In Turkey, women are still afraid of losing their jobs if they give names. And even with a lot of stories that people told on Twitter, and well-known people told on Twitter, most of us was, oh, I know who this guy is.
Right.
But no one talks about them.
Yeah.
So it's hard to talk about these names. It requires not only, it's not a matter of the fact that, because in the US those women were more courageous, but in Turkey they were not. It's just not that. It's very political also, and it's very it's so much based on the power balance at that specific time. So and yeah.
Do you think that could change?
It's totally up to us, like Binur said.
I think accountability is very important. So if you are not accountable, then nothing changes.
I think there's a really important point. If this tragic thing, a very tragic thing, is happening to this really innocent girl going back home from school on a bus, this is like, there's no way anyone would disagree that this is totally brutal, unacceptable, and there's no way to justify this. No way. And that's what the reaction was in Turkey. But when the girl is out at night, let's say 2 a.m., walking on the street, with like a little bit of like short skirt, then the perspective changes dramatically. So I think this needs to be changed. So it's always like on this very shaky ground, or if it's a trans woman being raped, the story changes dramatically again. So, this is one of the biggest issues. When perspectives are starting to change, I think that's when we're going to be able to talk about what's really happening in our little tiny industry.
That brings us back to the accountability and consequences. The killer of Özgecan Aslan was sentenced to life sentence because there's no more death sentence in Turkey. And that was one of the first times that he got a life sentence without any parole. Because most of the time, these killers or rapists in the past, they get a reduced sentence by just saying what you said. Oh, the girl provoked me. So, and you can get maybe, 10 years out of your whole life sentence. Or less. So that's what needs to change. Obviously, we all need to do our parts, but it's not just us, right? The laws need to change. And there's bigger power thing needs to shift from what we like to see.
But also,
Well, it seems that as this, if you want to change culture, and that's what this is about really, is cultural shift. then if there are more stories out there told by women, and also what's been exciting is that as the awareness has grown that we need more stories by women, the awareness has grown that we need more stories by indigenous populations, by racialized people, by people differently able. So that's been exciting to see that awareness grow. I forgot what I was going to say. Where was I going with this?
Stories told by women.
Yeah, so I think that's
I think it's both, right? Individuals, us, but then
Well,
also.
I mean, I think that, as you said, the stories are very powerful. One of the most exported TV series in Turkey that was done, I think, 6-7 years ago. What is the Fault of Fatma Gül? It's a very famous Turkish film as well. And then the whole premise is that a young woman who has a fiancé, an engaged young woman, gets gang raped by like these 4 rich guys. And then, of course, the fiancé immediately drops her because she's no longer, virginal and pure. And then her family forces her to marry one of the rapists, which happens a lot in Turkey, actually. So this series was very, very powerful, and it went all over the world, even in Brazil. People were like, oh my God, we love this series. And ultimately, it showed the story of this girl who was raped, victimized, and even though she was the victim, she was smeared, and her like empowerment story as a woman. I mean, I think it would be very hard to do that series today because since then things have become, I mean, even to talk about such an issue like rape or to show, I mean, of course they didn't, they alluded to it, but they shot it very nicely. You felt the horror of what happened to her. I don't think you can do it right now because it's sort of against the family values. So I do think that stories are very powerful because in this story it was showing that this is the victim and society, because of their patriarchal values, are not helping her, and just the opposite. So to see that is such an important, I think, relief for any young woman to see that. So we do need more stories like that in Turkey and even here. I mean, we were just mentioning that.
Do you remember the name of that series?
Does anybody remember this Netflix series about a serial rapist and 2 female detectives solve it? It just came out like 2 months ago. It's really good TV series about this serial raper in the US and how he moves from one state to another. And since rape is not considered such a huge crime, that the police do not file it, so they cannot follow this guy. And then one of the victims, they don't even believe her. So, I mean, this is a series that just recently came out.
It's called Unbelievable.
Unbelievable, yes,
Thank
and
you.
it is
Thank you.
unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, so I think that these stories are incredibly empowering. So we need more stories like that and more female filmmakers.
It also makes me think of something that I heard about this last season of Game of Thrones, which of course has come under a lot of criticism for its just astonishing amount of sexual violence, gratuitous sexual violence in the show. But there were no women writers, I think, in this last season.
I don't
None.
I mean, there are very few.
Oh, good.
Totally pure.
So to return to your point, Binur, about what we can do individually, I thought we might wrap up our part of this conversation before opening it up to questions from the audience, in talking about what each of us is doing right now, because I know that we are all actively engaged in trying to bring about the changes that we're discussing today. Who wants to start?
trying to hire more female directors, any production people. I think that's a start, and on my end, I'm trying to do as much as I can, whatever I can do. Beyond that, also, it's not necessarily just film, but we're talking with a friend, and we started every week, we will try to promote a women's initiative or someone's new job, or just try to boost that person and maybe promote her new company, something to do. I should be doing about you, your new film, your new thing. So we should be promoting each other and lifting each other up, and I am trying to do that every week.
I mean, for me too, it's the same. I really try to mentor whenever I can other women, because I think the whole mentorship idea is very important in our business. That's how people, men have a lot of mentors, because other men in power mentor the young men. So we can do that, and for me, just writing and creating more content that have strong and complicated female characters. And also, I'm a mother, I have a 13-year-old son, and how I raise him, I think is really important for gender equality.
When I read a script now, I mean, that's been going on for a while. The female character that I'm considered for, when I go deep into her, I just go back to myself in like when I was 13, 14 years old. And from my perspective today, what I would want her to see. So if I see any problems with the way how she's depicted, how my character is depicted, and if I think that my 13-year-old self would be affected in a negative way, I actually try to change that perspective if I can, with the character and with the script that I'm reading. And if I can't, then I choose not to be a part of that project. So this is the first thing that comes to mind.
So if there's time, I want to talk a little. Just personally, what I do as a filmmaker, and also another initiative that Women in Film has. Do we have time for? Well,
Yeah,
okay.
please.
So, Canada, as I mentioned earlier, does subsidize the film and television industry through government funding, but we also subsidize the film industry through tax credits, and that's something that most film production centers around the world do. Whether there's direct funding like Telefilm or Canada Media Fund, there is tax credits. So in the United States, several of the jurisdictions have tax credits that try to encourage the production industry in that place. And the tax credits, I think, are a tool that we can use around the world to try to build gender equity. And we have an initiative at Women in Film right now to bring in a equity investment tax credit in British Columbia. We've been working with UBCP ACTRA, which is the actors union here, who are very in supportive of this, because actors, as you know, really bear the brunt of the lack of gender equality, right? The roles that they play, the roles that they can, the work that they can get. I mean, we all do, but actors, there's so many actors with playing lousy roles. So it's been interesting that that coalition between Women in Film and the union to push this equity incentive BC. And we've seen in British Columbia, when we decided we wanted more productions in the regions like Maple Ridge, there was a tax incentive. You got a little bit more in your tax rebate if you shoot out there. There was also the post-production tax incentive. We wanted more coast to happen in Vancouver, so we created the Dave tax credit, and now Vancouver is one of the big post-production hubs internationally. Tax credits work, actually. And we get billions of dollars in tax credits, and most of the films that are made in BC are American movies. So if we're going to have an impact beyond our own Canadian films, we need to do it through the tax credit. So I hope you all support our tax credit incentive. We will be bringing it forward soon, and if, think about it in your own jurisdictions, how you might be able to call for changes to your tax credit systems. And then personally as a filmmaker, I'm exploring trying to tell stories outside of the traditional hero narrative, and to talk about communities and how communities work together to create change. So it's been an interesting exploration. But that's what I'm doing personally.
And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the role that I think that festivals can play in this process, to go back to the 50/50 by 2020 initiative. So this is something that's sort of like the subject of heated debate in the festival world. A lot of festivals are signing on, as Shirin mentioned, some of them enthusiastically and some of them much less enthusiastically. I think there's a sense among festivals, I mean, the director of the Venice Film Festival says the same thing year after year, where people are like, hey, you don't have any films by women in the competition, and he says, that's not our problem, we're just choosing from the films that are available. Like, if women choose not to submit films, what can we do? But of course, this is sort of I think, a willful ignorance about the nature of the problem and what we can all do to address it. I think that festivals absolutely have a role to play in their programming, as happens here. It's certainly something that I pay a lot of attention to in my own programming, seeking out films by women directors, but also supporting women directors in other ways, like through platforms at festivals, through mentoring, and through juries, right? Having women on juries at film festivals. I was on a jury at the Adana Film Festival last year. It was the international jury, and there were no films by women in the competition. And Ece Dizdar, a Turkish actress, and I, on behalf of the jury, made a complaint about that during the awards ceremony. Sort of said that we were very disappointed in that. And this year, that festival, under new leadership, signed on to that 2020 50/50 by 2020 pledge, which is quite an important step. I think they were the first festival in Turkey to do so. So congratulations to them. Yes. It's no surprise that now the programmers of that international competition are two women, and last year that was not the case. So with that, I wonder if we might open it up to your ideas of what could or should happen, and to your questions. So.
So we have two microphones. One microphone will be over there, one microphone will be here. So please don't hesitate if you have any questions. And may I mention that we had 198 submissions for the short film competition between Seattle and Vancouver for this festival, and there were several female directors, and 2 of them were in the top 10. And I have Özlem here and Ebru. They're going to help with the microphone. Özlem, if I could have one microphone too.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience. My question is about the film schools in Turkey and in Canada. There's so many film schools. what role, I mean, are there many film instructors in that schools? Because I also find that a lot of schools are going to recruit women to study science, but they would also recruit women to study film industry and to learn. I don't know what happens in Turkey. And then you make in Turkey, what are the problems if you make films with stories of grandmothers or grandparents? Because I'm doing Grandparents Film Festival for the last 3 years. It's based at home. I make a list of films with grandparents, and then people watch it at home. So I have no money. And Caroline has helped a lot. She tries to select some films with women, and I see there at least one film today showing tonight with Noah, with the grandfather. But I find that there are very few films with grandmothers. I call anybody with 50 plus grandparents because I can't find films with both grandparents and grandchildren. So I tried to bring some documentaries as well. So maybe you can comment. And I just want to say 2 things have happened in 2019. There's a person who did summer camp where he took the grandchildren and grandparents together and taught the grandchildren how to make a documentary of their grandparents. And the second thing is in Berlin, they are going to do Grandmothers Film Festival next year.
That's cool.
So,
Wow, that's awesome.
Do you guys want to speak to the film schools question?
And are you asking about film schools in Turkey? Well, I even taught for 1 semester at a graduate film program in Turkey. It seems like the amount of female filmmakers are equal to male, but the big problem with the Turkish film schools is that most of the education is all very theoretical. And they are basically, what they're doing is they're preparing these kids to become critics and academics. How many academics and critics can you have while there's a thriving industry? So I think that the problem of the film schools in Turkey is not gender disparity, but the fact that they are not preparing the students for real world. And in the US, when I went to USC 20 years ago, the ratio was terrible. It was 5 men to 1 woman. We thought dating opportunity, but we didn't. We didn't date any of the guys. But I mean, there was tremendous disparity back then, and USC is a very famous school that feeds into Hollywood, and you can see, female direct 1 to 5, but now it's much better.
what about making films with stories of grandparents? Would there be any problem doing this?
There's actually very few films that have good roles for women over 50, so I highly doubt that there's very many grandmothers,
Yeah, that's a good point.
grandfathers.
Although I feel like I just read something about Meryl Streep launching and funding like a platform or workshop initiative for women over 40 who want to be screenwriters. So,
Oh, yeah, yes, I read about that too.
right? So maybe some stories will come out. Yes.
There's one Turkish film recently, Pandora's Box, about, that's a grandmother story.
Oh,
Yeah.
And the grandson story, right?
Yeah.
Pandora's
Yeah.
box.
Just to answer your question, Pandora's Box by Yeşim
Yeah,
Mustafa,
tell me,
female
I'll
director.
put it in my
Yeah,
card.
female director, yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Very good.
Fits the bill.
Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
I don't know if this is as much a question as a comment, but I'm sure you have comments as well about it. I think that women in film industry fits under a much wider umbrella of what happens more generally politically, both in the United States and in Turkey. In Turkey, I was struck that you've talked about since 2015, which was the time of the failed coup, and the changes in the AK Party administration and legislative changes wrong with it. And in the United States, just yesterday, we were watching the impeachment proceedings and the woman ambassador who had been in the Ukraine at the time. And so if there is not a wider accountability on a political, legislative, and legal level, I think women are always at the bottom of the totem pole.
That is true.
When we look at this rise that we have made in Canada, the ones that I mentioned earlier, those were only made possible after Harper was not re-elected, when the Trudeau government. Yeah, the current politics makes a huge, huge, huge difference.
I was just gonna say that I think one way in which the U.S. is different from Turkey is that our dismal government doesn't have much power or influence directly on the entertainment industry in that, I mean, of course, the downside of this is that there's no government funding for the arts in the US, right, and for film. And in Turkey, it's different, like, as you were saying, like, the Ministry of Culture is really kind of a gateway that has done a lot of filmmakers a lot of harm in recent years. But someday, you know, it's good that there is that funding, and someday it will be more widely available. The sooner the better.
There is and also in Turkey there is a board of censorship that censors TV. So if they find some scene in a TV series that's against family values, then the network and the production company is fined a huge monetary fine. So what I see is that a lot of the writers are self-censoring. It's like during the McCarthy period in the US. So a lot of people are trying to make sure that they don't write scenes that would be censored.
Is that including politics?
Say again?
Is that including politics themes?
Does that include political
things?
None of these series are political. I mean, they're all melodramas. So it's not political, but it just depends. Sometimes a kiss can get fined, sometimes like a cuss word. It just depends. I mean, I don't know how they make it, but there is a censorship board.
I just want to say that family values is such a broad thing. It's fantastic that women support women in Turkey, and I see wonderful movies and series in Turkey, but half the population are men. And has there anything available for men to be educated with and make them more accountable or systematically involved in the matter of equality amongst women in Turkey? Because I think it's very important. We talk about women being more close and getting educated amongst themselves, but I think it's as important for men to be actively and systematically involved in women's issues, because they are the one that are, the other half of the population. So
I don't know if there has been a lot of campaigns in Turkey that involved men, and I agree. I mean, men should be very much involved because really, I mean, 50% are men. There has been campaigns like Daddy Send Me to School. That was a really successful campaign geared towards fathers in rural areas to make sure that they send their girls to school. So I think, that conversation is very important. But the other thing that I just remembered, I made a documentary before our regular one called Voices Unveiled, and it was all about Turkish women and Turkish women's struggle for self-empowerment. And this was like 8-9 years ago, and the percentage of Turkish representatives in the Congress was 4.4 back then. So I do think that if we had more women in politics in Turkey, it would also be great for society at large.
I just wanted to add and support what the other lady had said. It's not about men against women. I know that women have been disenfranchised for so long that we need to put a lot more focus on women in art, in many forms of art. But any conversation has to include men. And it also goes back to how we socialize our boys as well. I mean, even till today, we have a disconnect between how we regard the boys in our family and the way we regard the girls in our family even today. And that has to change if we're going to change the attitude and mentality completely and have men involved, because it's a balance. But I also wanted to ask Binur, because I'm very curious. Maybe you weren't raised in Turkey, but what was it? What were your role models? What was for you that broke that ceiling, the glass ceiling? And what were your challenges? And were there anything that really helped you to get to where you are today?
Well, I mean, we were all talking before, is that how everything is a vicious cycle, actually. Violence breeds more violence, and for women to have a strong mother, a role model, is really very important. I mean, my mother is a very strong working mother, and also somebody who's very involved with women's organizations. So I grew up seeing that. And once again, as Sadet was talking about, how important that is when you see that, when you see your mother working and also, being the president of the Women's Association, working to empower other women. So I think that for me, I had that. And then I was very lucky because I had education. I mean, one of the problems in Turkey is access to education, and some of it is financial, because if there's a poor family, they have 5 kids, they send the boys to school, because they cannot afford. So, I mean, for me, having a strong role model like my mother was really great. And then, of course, I mean, I've had a lot of challenges in the U.S. and in Turkey, just because I am a woman, and it's hard for female directors. I had a hard time, getting some jobs or getting my films made, and it's been challenging. Even doing The Protector as a female showrunner wasn't easy, but also you have to just carry on and do it, I think.
I just want to speak to this point about what men can do, because I do think it's important, not only because they're 50% of the population, but because they're the 50% of the population with power. So it is important, it's essential that they be involved in this process. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and clearly, like, men can do all the things that we are talking about doing ourselves. I think that it is incumbent on us to challenge our male colleagues to do those things, whether it's mentoring, whether it's hiring women on your crew and paying them well, whether it is doing the kind of programming work that we were talking about earlier. I was back to this thing about women on juries. Like, I was just on a jury that had 3 women and 2 men on it, which is a rarity that you get more than 1 woman on a jury, so that was great. But we had an argument about where we wanted to recognize a female filmmaker, and both of the men made a virtue of saying, like, I don't think about gender, right? I just want to talk about the quality of the film. And this is, I feel like this requires education on our part. And so that's, I think that's part of the work that we have to undertake as well. That it's not just, that saying, I don't care about this issue, as these jurors did, is how we got into the situation in the first place, and it's why it's slow to change.
What I've discovered through our festival, where most of our juries are women, although we do have some men evaluating films too, is how subjective quality is. And it really depends on the background of the person watching the film. So whether they're a man, whether they're a woman, whether they're indigenous, whether they're South Asian, whatever, it makes a huge, huge difference on how they define quality. So I'm almost ready to throw the idea of quality out the window. We are not judging based on quality. Or quality is subjective to our backgrounds. And now I really work hard to ensure that we have diverse juries. I mean, they're women, but there's diverse women. That's really, really important now. So yeah. We need jury members.
All right, I think if there aren't any final questions, we will wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming today and participating in our